Hello, everyone. I'm Ivana Wilson, and today I have a privilege of speaking with one and only one of the most accomplished expert in the field of opportunity framing workshops, which is Mr. Franklin Koch. Just a little bit about Frank. Frank has over 30 years of experiences in strategy development, decision analysis, major capital project evaluation, opportunity framing, game theory, as well as behavioral aspects of decision making and portfolio management. Frank coached executives, project teams, decision makers, and recently high school students, helping them evaluate complex decisions. Very briefly, Frank started in Chevron. He was part of the Chevron corporate group that first introduced decision analysis in 1990. Since then, he was framing, facilitating, consulting, and teaching on the topic of framing and facilitation, as well as decision making. So, Frank is a founding fellow of the Society of Decision Professionals. And in 2022, last year, that's where we met. Frank, along with Larry Neal and Brian Put, won the Society of Decision Professionals Pioneer Award for their lifetime achievement in decision analysis. So, without further ado, let's welcome Frank Koch. So, Frank, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ivana, and thank you for the introduction. It's always nice. You say, well, you get a lifetime award like that, and so you say, okay, I guess I'm done. I guess I'll retire and just go sit around because I'm not going to top that. But meanwhile, I'm having fun, and it's great to be here today.
Okay, so Frank, just really for those of you who might not be so familiar, could you briefly tell us what opportunity framing workshops are and why they are so important for projects?
Okay, what they are is, and I guess if I were to very simply put, it's to me it's a part of the front end of the decision process, and it's a lot about curiosity, not advocacy. It's about trying to figure out what might happen, not just what you want to have happen, but what you might want to have happen. It's a search for value, both the obvious and the hidden value. And the decision approach based on that curiosity is one that's going to really help you fail and learn things about your project. And it's really learning. So we talk a lot about, just the workshop and the mechanics, but I want to at least start with that framework that it's about curiosity and really wondering what might happen to inform you. A lot of decisions are framed around symptoms, not opportunities, problems, not solutions. And in particular, most decision processes start with an answer. There's already some really smart person in the room that knows exactly what to do. And the whole exercise, and I've seen this done so often with people, is an exercise not in decision analysis, but it's in decision justification. And you go through all of the tools. You'll go through framing workshops. You'll see decision hierarchy, strategy tables, tornado diagrams, decision trees, everything, all reverse engineered unintentionally. It looks good. It looks just like textbook decision analysis and framing, but it's all designed so that at the end you can say to the boss, see, you were right after all. And the boss feels really good about that. And that's just nonsense. And so framing opportunity, I think the first thing you need to think about sort of framing opportunities and how to go about that is to how to break that system. And there's no real secret to it. I think a lot of it is getting the right people in the room, and it's helping them understand that they've got to put this figure right. What is this project really about? What decisions am I really making here? What am I trying to discover? What are the opportunities that I might be missing? How big could this be? How different could this be? And then what do I want to focus on? When you think about framing, I always like to tell people if you think about framing, why do you even frame it? Why do we call it framing? And the question I like to ask this is, say, let's say that you go to Paris, you go to the Louvre, and you walk through the Louvre, and you see all sorts of absolutely beautiful paintings. I mean, the Mona Lisa is there, and there are all these great works of art, and you loved it. And you walk out, and I come up to you, and I say, hey, you enjoyed the Louvre? Yeah. What color were the walls? And people look and say, huh? What color were the walls? You spent all day walking around looking at the walls. What color were they? I have no idea. I said, that's because they're outside the frame. You looked at the frame said, look here. This is where it's at. Look here. And I said, you have no idea what was around, even though probably 90% of your vision field was filled with wall. You have no idea. And so framing is really around focusing, looking at this opportunity and figuring out what's the picture, what's the wall, what am I going to ignore, and what am I going to really dig into in my decision process. Because if you frame something too big, the proverbial world hunger, you're going to fail. If you narrow it too much, then you're going to miss a huge amount of value. If you go look at the Mona Lisa and you just look at her smile and you don't see anything else, well, you haven't seen that whole picture. You haven't gotten the whole value of looking at the Mona Lisa. And so framing is very deliberate to say, how big should it be? How small should it be? And the process should help you figure out how to focus on that. So did that come close to answering your question? I'm never sure. Tell me what I missed, and I'll make up something else.
No, I get it. It is really what you just said for me, about opportunity identification and really focusing on solving the right problem as opposed to justifying someone else's decision. What's the roadmap? And I can really, as a framing facilitator, I've been facilitating for over 12 years, I can really relate to that. It's just, it really comes up in the way of project executive engaging with a framing facilitator. When those companies that are already experienced with opportunity framing, they can push too quickly, they can jump into conclusions too quickly. And so really the next question is, what is your role? So what is your role as a framing facilitator? Especially it's important for those companies that might sit on the fence whether framing is for them or not. So they need to understand, at what point do you usually come as a framing facilitator? What point do you want to come? And then what is your role before, during, and after?
Okay. So I tell one, I'm often brought in to projects, to framing projects, once somebody's already started it and they're struggling and want some help. And I went once upon a time, there was quite a team meeting doing this big framing workshop, and I walked in and the person who'd been leading it was just struggling. And he said, Frank, can you come in and sit in the back and just help me out here? Okay. So I walk in, I sit in there. First of all, there are 40 people in the room. It was a joint venture with many, many people from different companies. And it was just, everybody was talking, and the facilitator was sitting over at the keyboard taking notes, which, by the way, if you're sitting at a keyboard taking notes, you're not facilitating. You are basically the secretary, like the person in the courtroom that's over there doing the transcription. And so he was just sitting there, and I listened for about an hour and a half. And there was a few individuals, one individual in particular who was like the senior manager of a national oil company, was part of this team. And he just kept talking and didn't let up. And so we finally took a break. And at the end, I told Bob, I said, I'll take over the meeting now. And so I walked up front and stood up there. And of course, people, who is this guy? I don't know who he is. And I'm standing up there, bringing them all back together. And I introduced myself. And the way I introduced myself, I'm Frank Koch, and I am a decision paramedic. I said, I only show up like a paramedic, like an EMT. I said, I only show up when you're already in a lot of trouble. I said, I'm going to do things to you that you really are going to hate. Paramedics, they stick tubes down your throat, all kinds of stuff. I said, when I'm done, you're going to be happy that I did this, and you're going to pray to God that you never see me again. And there was stunned Silence. They all looked at me. And then this gentleman in the front says, well, before you get going, I need to talk some more. I need to say some more. So I said, no, I'm up here now. I'm going to lead the meeting. So you just sit down. He said, no, I says, I really have to say a few more things. I said, you've been talking for the last hour. Let's sit down. And I said, you're still going to participate, but I can't just stand up and monopolize this. He says, no, I have to talk about something. And I said, sit down and shut up. Stunned silence in the room again. He plopped down and sat down. And everybody looked. My gosh, he just told the senior executive of this national oil company to sit down and shut up. Then I went on with the business. Basically, I had listened to the back. They had a couple significant problems that they needed to solve. So and this is oil and gas. So one was about basically subsurface, how to get the oil out of the ground. And the other problem was sort of around the partner relationships and some legal things. And so it's okay. I wrote some functions, geologist, petroleum engineer on one sheet, and some, landman and lawyer on the other sheet. I said, okay, I need 8 names for each of these. Who's on this? Got the names of who's going to go there for each of the teams. I said, okay, that's 16 of you, 2 teams of 8. Everybody else, I said, go back to your job. I said, you're not needed here right now. And I looked again. And so and then we got the 2 smaller groups together. So, okay, now you guys know what you're going to do. Yeah, that's great. They were all fine. So after about an hour and a half of that, I got ready to leave. We took, of course, another break. I think it was lunchtime. And I told the 40, I said, you can stay and eat lunch. Okay, I'm not a bad guy. You can stay and eat lunch. But then go back to whatever you're getting paid to do. And at the end, Bob, the facilitator who called for the rescue said, oh, Frank, everybody has been wanting to tell that guy to sit down and shut up for so long, but we were all scared to. And I said, see, it was okay. I said, he is never going to see me again. You can later say, oh, that Frank's a terrible jerk, but he'll get rid of it. But I said, it worked. I said, so it's seeing what you need to do and how to do that. Now, this isn't really about framing, but it's about figuring out what people need to hear and trying to get them to think about it. So you have to be brave. 2 of that, I tell one other, all I do is tell stories anymore. Maybe that's all I've done in my whole life. Another story. This was another company, not Chevron. I'll be perfectly clear. It's not Chevron. It's another company. And I was sitting down with the CEO and all of his direct reports. And this is a story about fear and dishonesty and how that poisons decisions. And I was talking about framing. I was introducing the idea of framing and how to go through this. And the CEO stops me. He says, well, framing just seems unnecessary for some problems. Some problems are just obvious to solve. Why do we have to waste our time framing this opportunity? I said, okay, give me an example of what you're thinking about. He said, okay, I've got a current opportunity that I'm facing, and it has to do with leasing a tanker. I want to lease a tanker basically to use as storage off of a facility. I said, okay. And so your decision is what? Lease the tanker or not? Yes or no, right? Okay. He said, you don't have to frame that. He says, it's simple. I said, well, okay, I know what yes means. I said, yes means you're going to lease this tanker. What's no mean? He said, what do you mean, what's no mean? I said, if you don't lease the tanker, what happens? Oh, we'll figure that out once we decide not to lease the tanker. I said, how can you decide whether to lease the tanker or not if you don't know what other things you might do? I said, there was clearly a problem and something came up that you decided, I want to lease this tanker. And so there's some driving business purpose, I assume, underlying leasing this tanker. And so if you don't lease the tanker, the problem is still there or the opportunity is not realized. So what else do you do if you say no? I mean, do you lease a different tanker? Do you build a pipeline? Do you shut down the field? And what happens? And he kept saying, Frank, you're overcomplicating this. I don't need to figure that out until I decide what to do with the tanker. I said, I don't know if leasing the tanker is the best thing or not because I don't know what else you would do. And he was just blind to this. He couldn't see that he'd only framed half the problem. Now, the fear and dishonesty comes in because all his direct reports start nodding and agreeing with him. Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right. This is right. Frank, we really don't need this. That's fine. I said, okay. I said, this is your company. You just pay me to come in and tell you what I think and help you out. But I said, I don't really care. I don't own stock in your company. You guys can do whatever you want. So the meeting ended in that note. And The next day I had a meeting with each of the individual senior executives, guys reporting to the CEO. To an individual, they all sat down and said, he was really wrong yesterday, wasn't he? I said, we understood your point. He was really wrong. And I said, what? He said, yeah, we agree with you. Oh, so why didn't you agree with me in the meeting? Oh, we couldn't do that. What do you mean we couldn't do it? Well, the CEO was there and we agreed with the CEO. I said, oh, so you were lying to him. Well, no. And then this is a company like most companies have these stupid posters of honesty as our, value and all this nonsense on the wall. I said, telling him you agree with him when you don't agree with him sounds a lot like lying in my book. Well, it's not lying. I said, well, what is it then? Well, we just couldn't say it because, fear of retribution. So fear and dishonesty. I told him at that point, I said, there's nothing I can do in terms of a framing workshop, in terms of decision training, in terms of consulting, if you're going to lie to each other. I said, now, if you want to lie to your customers, if you want to lie to your partners, if you want to lie to the public, go right ahead. I'm not here to judge you morally at all. But I said, lying to yourself is stupid. Why would anyone lie to themselves and deceive themselves? And this is where we came back to this old idea of curiosity. Stop being afraid, be curious. What else might happen if I don't get the tanker? Maybe there's some really great thing out there that I've missed because I'm blinded by the fact that this tanker opportunity has just jumped up in front of me. And I'm so focused on that one choice that I block out everything else and claim that I'm doing a good decision. Total nonsense. Anyway.
I've got quite a lot of questions really based on what you just said.
Okay.
But how about we first really talk about, from your experiences, what are the key components to decision making? Because looks like still even amongst executives, there might not be an alignment about, what makes a good decision a good decision.
I think a lot of answers to that. I'll tell you one thing that it's not about, though. It's not directly about the outcome. A lot of people judge a decision simply by the outcome. And of course, we all want good outcomes. And statistically, if you have good decision processes, you overall should have a lot of good outcomes. But sometimes things just happen. And part of the process then is understanding what might happen, what might not happen. And so a good decision process, when you think about an outcome, if you have a good decision process, you should never be surprised by the outcome. Even if something really bad happens, you should be able to think back and say, okay, yeah, I realized that was a potential. I chose to accept the risk. I thought I could do things to mitigate that risk or eliminate it. Didn't quite work. I've learned some stuff, but I'm not surprised. I at least recognize that it was out there. And I don't have any regrets because at the time, with all I knew, and there's always uncertainty in any decision process, if it's worth anything. I mean, I suppose, there's no uncertainty if I'm going to go buy a box of cereal at the store or something. But any important decision, particularly those decisions about the future, have inherent uncertainty. And so there's things that you don't know. But my process when I facilitate is to try to get people to face up to things that they don't realize. What else might happen? I know we spend 99% of the time on the good things, is to think about the other stuff. So there should be, in a good decision, regardless of the outcome, you should never have the regret. You should never be surprised. You should always say, I did the best I can. I can learn. I may have said, wow, I missed something back then. Okay, well, the next decision, understand and look for that. So again, it's this curiosity and learning process. But that's really the only way that you know that your decisions are good overall. And that's to continually look at your projects as they come through, evaluate how they did, reflect back on how can I change the way I frame the problem. Maybe I missed it the frame. Maybe I just missed some big uncertainties that were out there that I underestimated what could happen, and learn so the next decision gets better. There's this iterative decision, and the more you do it, the better you get. And we certainly saw this when I was at Chevron back then. Is, you know, at first, some decision analysis in the whole process when it first kicked out in the early 90s was basically optional. It was not mandated by the corporation. It's some units embraced it and did a lot of these, and other units still with the old advocacy shoot from the hip. And the CEO said, okay, you know, you guys are all top managers in your operating company, so you do what's right. I'm not going to tell you what you should do. And so we're able to do this wonderful little experiment. Over time, you'd say, okay, what happens when you start looking back? And one of the things we found is that in those operating companies where they were using some good sound decision processes, framing workshops, doing good probabilistic modeling, whatever was required, that they were performing better. They had fewer surprises. They were generally feeling pretty satisfied. And a lot of the real mess ups were just things, you know, where did that come from? I had no idea were happening in these units that were shooting from the hip. And so at some point, the successor CEO looked and he says, oh, we got to mandate this for major projects, things over, I'd say 100 million or some magic number, have to go through this more rigorous process. We can't just afford you to, you know, shoot for the hip for, you know, $1 billion project somewhere because you think it sounds good. And so it was that learning and looking back that gave people the incentive to say, we've really got to do this rigorously and correctly. And that's really what launched a lot of what I did and a lot of the training, the decision maker training, not just training teams, but training decision makers on how to become good consumers of what comes out. So when what comes out of a framing workshop, what questions should you ask? What should you be looking for? And I said, and it's not one of these hideous Excel templates with 47 tabs, each tab completely filled out. And what you're looking for, insights and what you've learned. And I said, so you have to participate a bit in this to find out. It's not, you just can't read the abstract at the end. And so we had to train people to do that differently. And we're quite successful, I think, in training and getting, and training, you know, I like you mentioned at the start, I've spent a lot of time in high school volunteering after I retired. And I loved it because, you know, you don't have to uneducate high school students. They're already a blank slate and they're hungry to learn this. You could teach them things. Yeah. CEOs and vice presidents, you have to spend half your time uneducating them because obviously I'm the CEO. I must make good decisions. You say, yeah, or maybe you're married to the former CEO's sister. I don't know. But yeah, you have to get them to unlearn their bad habits, basically decision habits that they've gotten away with. And a lot of times, you know, the guy that gets to the top is the one that was lucky. They had some good outcomes and they confused luck with brilliance and they promoted them to the top. And I'm not saying these are bad guys, but they can learn things. And so you have to educate them, but they do have to be motivated to be educated.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I want you to reflect on the decision quality wheel, Frank, and just really from your experiences, what elements of the decision quality wheel people struggle the most? You know, is it about that objective, like in your previous case study, or is it about searching for new viable options? You know, or is it the information? From your experiences, which element is really the hardest?
I think the ones that they struggle with the most, and unfortunately, they're the two that are the foundation of the decision quality. If you don't do these two well, you can do all the great analysis in the world, and it's not going to help because it's on a weak foundation. So that's first, the frame, figuring out what am I really deciding up front so I don't do a lot of brilliant work on the wrong thing. So getting the frame right. And the other piece is the values. What is really important to me, and how do I trade them off? You know, it's rare that you find the perfect solution that optimizes every one of your values and objectives. If it does, wonderful, go celebrate. But usually there's some trade-off. You know, there's costs, schedule trade-offs, yeah, all kinds of things. So you say, how do you do that? I mean, getting people to talk about their values is really critical. And one insight that I got over my career, it's an insight that I think we found at Chevron after doing this for quite a bit of time, is sort of what comes first, the frame or the values. And we started to say, and this sort of is echoes of Ralph Keeney, another brilliant award-winning guy, one of the smartest guys I know, who's written many books on values in decision making. And it's starting with the values. What's important? What do I really want? Because again, framing is this searching the opportunity for where is the value? Where is the most value that I can extract from this thing, whatever that opportunity is? And if I don't know what the value is, then how do I know what I'm looking for? Now, with some companies, oh, well, it's profit and that's easy. And yeah, okay. If it was all just profit, then the whole world would actually just be arithmetic. And, you'd still have to worry about uncertainty and what's the price of tea going to be and all this. But it's so big when you say, the values are more important. People make a lot of big strategic decisions because of partner relationships. I want to do things because it's important for this partnership. There are things that I could do that might make more money, but it might hurt the partnership, and the partnership is important. A lot of companies have a lot of values around, and particularly this is growing a lot around, environment, climate, the whole issues around the world and the impact of the world. Getting people up front to say, how important is that? How do you, and how do you measure, how do you value that? And so you kind of start thinking about the values, but then it becomes iterative between the frame and the values. You go back and forth. This is what I'm searching for. Oh, in the frame, I find something. Oh, this is interesting. How does that affect my values? Or, gee, I don't see how the values are reflected in this opportunity. What am I missing? And there's this iterative thing. And again, where I see so many facilitations of framing opportunities fail is they get very mechanistic and they go through steps, but they don't sit back at the end and say, so have we figured it out? If I filled out the 46 templates, I must have it in here somewhere, right? And you go, well, maybe you got 46 templates of crap. I don't know. You think about the value. So those are the two important ones. Of course, the others, for those who aren't familiar, you've got alternatives, you've got, correct reasoning, you've got the whole understanding of the uncertainties and the information. And then there's finally the commitment to action. And the commitment to action and follow-throughs. Do you actually do what you decided? Or, many teams, they finish, they make the decision, they all celebrate, and everybody walks out of the room and says, okay, I'm going to unwind that terrible thing. And they fall apart because there was never any commitment. And so you've got to work all those in parallel. And so some purists will say they're all equally important, and you say, okay, but the framing and the value pieces are the most important pieces because there's nothing in the rest of the decision quality wheel that fixes that problem if you start poorly. So long answer to a two answer question.
I can totally relate. So really make sure that when we go through options identification, really before that piece, we understand, where would the value come from, and then what are the value drivers, and then what are some of those decision measures. And this conversation often open people up. Is safety going to be the number one priority, like you mentioned? Or when we've got safety, then often, is it the reputation? Or are we more driven by execution and looking at cost and schedule? And that might disqualify potential options that could be a better fit for what we actually trying to achieve. So this is extremely important. So what I want to ask to think about is really what's going on around the world. And I really believe that there is something like, I could describe this as a breakdown in critical thinking. So many people just take things for granted. The project sponsor comes up and gives this grounding presentation, and there isn't much willingness to kind of, challenge that, challenge the status quo. What is going on? What is missing in the today reality? Is this an issue of the culture of an organization, or is it something that you see, whoever you've been working with? Is it a nonprofit or for-profit organization, or is it something, because my clients are mainly oil and gas energy, but I do get to work with smaller organizations right now as well, and I see there seem to be a bit of that resistance to say and ask questions. How is that being a given? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so oh boy, there's a lot of in there, and I'll say up front that critical thinking is incredibly important, and as I saw in high school, one of the things that motivated me to go back and volunteer in high school, not just that it's fun hanging out with teenagers and getting it, just they're so alive and excited, it's just fun to be around, but that the schools have done, at least in my experience, I live in Oregon now, but in Texas, other places that have gotten so driven by standardized testing. Principals and schools are rewarded by test scores. People are driven to pass tests, and it's very deeply ingrained. And I love to tell the kids, it was because I was a volunteer, I would tell them, okay, I'm the one honest person here. I will tell you the truth. I will not, I'm not paid. This is the honesty. And I said, so you're getting a great education in the one skill that you will never need once you get out of school, and that is taking tests. I said, in the real world on the job, there are no multiple choice tests. And you're getting really good at taking multiple choice tests, but that's useless. And I said, you got to think. And when you're trained to pass tests, I've known people, gosh, I did my earlier life. I was one of these people. I was a great test taker. You learned how to take tests. There's science that did you learn anything? Yeah, I learned how to take tests. But we don't have critical thinking. We don't teach people the one important thing is the decision process. Kids, you got these guys, they're going to graduate from high school. And for most of them, all of a sudden go to where either their parents or their teachers or maybe somebody else told them what to do all the time. They're just doing, okay, do that, go there, do that, do your homework, come here, do that. And all of a sudden they get out and I say, well, guess what? You now have to make all the decisions yourself. Nobody is going to tell you to do this. I said, you go to college. I said, professors aren't going to nag you about doing the homework. I said, they're not going to nag you about coming to class. Their attitude is, you already paid the tuition to come here. You've already bought the service. If you don't want to come sit in my class, fine, waste your money. I don't care. And so they're not going to nag you to come and do this. I said, you have to decide. I asked, when do you decide to go to college? And the kids would, say, well, when I apply or when I accept it or some crazy answer like that. I said, no, the day you decided to go to college is the first day of class when you walk into the classroom. That is when you decided to go to college. Everything else, you decided that you'd apply here. You decided that you'd send them a big check for some money. You decided a bunch of stuff. But until you go, you didn't decide to go. And again, this is back to this sort of commitment to action aspect of decision quality. So that's my sort of rant on critical thinking. And then the other thing I try to teach people, particularly about asking and really thinking hard about things like the frame, is being comfortable with the phrase, I don't know. Because to most, the correct answer to most questions about the future is, I don't know. What will the weather be like tomorrow? I don't know. What will happen in Ukraine? I don't know. What will happen next week? I don't know. But people are scared to say, I don't know, because in school they were taught that that's the wrong answer. If you say, I don't know, that must mean you're stupid. And it's no, it's because nobody knows. It's uncertain. Ask me about questions in the past. I can say, I know, that John F. Kennedy was a president. He was shot. Okay, I know some people don't think the conspiracy theorists, but anyway, but I said, I don't know many decisions in the past. They're gone. And so teaching people, and I got in high school, I'd start kids saying, I don't know. You should learn to say, I don't know. tell the CEOs, it's okay to say, I don't know. So I don't know if this frame is right. What else can we do? I don't understand this. And to try to change that whole conversation to get people comfortable with that. That's one of the root things I learned is being a process facilitator for so long. I was learning, wait, it's all about the conversation. It's getting people to talk about the right stuff, and the processes, the tools, the charts, all that stuff are simply devices to get people to talk about the right stuff. We started teaching people decision-making behaviors, and these were conversational behaviors. They're behaviors like, so you're sitting in a framing meeting, Somebody makes a statement. They say, I think that we should do X. You should not just say, oh, no, I think we should do Y. You say, oh, no. See, the first thing you want to do is you want to explore the reasoning. Well, why do you think X is good? Why do you think X is the right way to go? Help me understand you before you argue. Help me understand. When you make a statement, I think we should do Y, you should invite disagreement. And this is like for CEOs and that, who, people are, again, fear and dishonesty. I don't want to tell the CEO he's wrong, right? It is to invite it, to actually say, look, I know I must be missing something. Help me figure out what I'm missing. What don't I understand here? Ask for people. Share your reasoning with people. Try to talk through the problems and admit that other ideas might be right. And if you can get that conversation to change, miracles happen. And we actually did this at Chevron. We had a whole series of training of executives from the CEO down to project managers and everybody in between. And in the class, it was basically a short, like two and a half day class. I went through a lot of things, but the centerpiece of the class was a computer simulation where they were making decisions. So we built a fake project in a fake country, and they had to decide, and through framing and analysis and all this to make decisions. And there were 3 rounds of decision making in this simulation, and we had behavior coaches. I mean, these were actually behavioral psychologists sitting in the room watching people behave, and they had a little chart. And so every time Alona would say, I disagree with something, they'd check it down. Or every time she'd say, well, help me with your reason, well, they'd check it down, right? So they would actually keep score on each individual about how they behaved, what they asked, what they didn't ask. Again, these are almost all conversational behaviors. And then the next round, people do it. And maybe they'd improve. The behavior coach would say, well, next time, work harder at drawing out other people's. So then they check that. Well, did you do more of that? And so with each person, they do more. And they do it in 3 rounds. And people, again, and then you'd see at the end how their decisions turned out. And again, I'm mixing outcomes and decisions here, but we did it. So what we looked over time, because we were doing these several, I've done hundreds of these over like 10 years of doing this at Chevron. What we found in tracking the results and tracking what we had done in terms of the behaviors, the teams that used the behaviors did better in the simulation than teams that didn't learn those behaviors. So this is a breakthrough in terms of decision making and framing, that these behaviors you're not behaving because it's nice. You're not asking somebody's opinion because you care about them and all this nonsense. You're doing this because it makes you money. It hits the bottom line. You get better answers. You make better decisions. Bam! When that got through, that these conversational behaviors made you money. Oh, I want to do more of that. When it was just, oh, you have to behave. Oh, my mom always said I had to behave. I don't want to do that, right? So it was making that link that these conversational behaviors were critical to getting the right stuff out of a framing workshop, or if you're in a decision review board at the end, trying to make a decision, or any step in between where you're involved. Talking about the right stuff and understanding this, being willing to say, I don't know, and to recognize that even though you're the CEO, the engineer sitting in the corner probably knows more about this opportunity than you do. because that's that person's whole job. And so you should be pumping them for information, not trying to impress them on how clever you are. They already know you're clever. You're the CEO. Don't worry about it. But draw out from them, learn from them. And I've seen companies, I have consulted briefly in companies that could not make that switch. Fear and dishonesty took over. And I basically quit consulting after getting a lot of money from them. And I finally went in and talked. I said, is anything improving? They says, well, no. I said, it's because you're not changing. You're still lying to each other. But now you're using this very expensive process. So you're lying very expensively to each other. And I said, I don't want to take your money anymore. I'm sorry. And I left. And that company didn't do very well after that. But because they inherently were making really bad decisions that people in the field knew. The engineers, the analysts on the ground knew there were problems. But they couldn't stop the train because at the top it was being driven and nobody would honestly stand up and say, wait a minute, we're missing the boat here. This is wrong. And so those behaviors all come back to the real secrets. And this is probably not what you expected to hear about framing workshops. You probably expected to talk about decision hierarchies and SWOT analyses and all that crap. But
No, this is exactly. I'm speaking to other framing facilitators, and I think you just hit the nail with the impact of the culture. So it's almost like on one hand, I see that when companies implement opportunity framing workshops, it can really revolutionize the way they speak, the way they think, the way they communicate, and even the way they run their meetings, not only just framing workshops, but they can lose that opportunity. And and it's almost like you come in as a consultant, you do a framing and it's rigid, right? Like you see there are people really live in those silos, and they really struggling with expressing themselves and challenging the statements. And obviously you need a little bit more time for those framing to actually work for them so they can experience those benefits. So if you if you are to speak to someone who never had any opportunity framing workshops in their organization, like how would you explain the typical outcomes? Someone brand new, really unfamiliar with decision quality or stage gate process. How would you, I don't want to say the word sell, I would say, how would you make them curious about what's possible?
yeah, I think it's helping them to maybe reflect on sort of the subtleties and the complexities around the opportunities, and to say that the whole process is around cure and helping you understand you're about to do something to yourself. And I often would define the whole decision analysis process of trying to understand what you're about to do to yourself. And I think sort of going that way, that this is a process of, first, it's a lot of reflection. It's the willingness to reflect and again, see this, what do I understand well? What don't I understand well? What other perspectives might there be to this opportunity? When I look at this opportunity, I see one thing. Other people might see different thing. I mean, there's the old story of the elephant and the five blind men, and the one grabs his tail and the trunk, and they're all describing something different. Well, that's the way it is when you get into a meeting, because you'll have people in different functions. In oil and gas, I might have a geologist and a drilling engineer, and I might have an accountant, but they each see that elephant differently. And so part of the selling is the framing workshop is this cooperative effort where you're going to get not only a better understanding of the opportunity from your point of view, but a shared understanding of what this thing is that we call an opportunity. And is it really what you think it is? And so it's getting them to reflect that you can't do a framing workshop on something complex alone. I mean, if I'm going to decide what to cook for dinner, okay, maybe I don't have to spend a lot of time framing that. But if I'm having a dinner party and a bunch of people are coming over my house, then I have to sit and frame and start thinking about, well, what are these people like? Maybe some people are vegetarian or vegan. Gee, do I have to think about that? Maybe they have some food allergies. So I have to go through a little framing exercise. I might not do that alone. So I might shoot them a text, give them a call, say, hey, Do you have any food allergy, any issues, anything that you really can't eat, etc.? So I'm getting more information about this opportunity, which is to feed my friends, and we have a wonderful party here. So framing, it's gathering information I don't know. And so with the team, it's sort of reflecting on the same thing. What do I know when I get different people together? How does that change and improve my understanding of the value that's there? And on the flip side, the value losses that may be there. If I do this well, I get a lot of money. If I do this poorly, I've spent a lot of money and I get nothing. To understand both of those sides. And you mentioned culture, and culture is a really tough nut to crack, because culture is deeply, deeply embedded. And there are corporate and company cultures. And as I said before, some company cultures are so averse that I simply tell them, I can't help you. I said, you have to be able to change some really fundamental, and there are some command and control cultures where the boss is right and nobody contradicts them. And I just wish them good luck. I don't, because I can fix your culture. Generally, fixing cultures requires a real culture shock. Bankruptcy can help change corporate cultures, but it's just to that magnitude. The other thing are international cultures. There are some, particularly if you go to some Asian countries, there is a very strong hierarchical sense that's deeply embedded, that the senior guy talks, and contradicting the senior guy is very heavily culturally discouraged. I mean, you lose face to do that. So how do you get those behaviors into those kinds of cultures? How do you do that when we're teaching people to make better decisions, to have better framing workshops? You have to learn to disagree with each other. But in some cultures, disagreeing with each other, particularly somebody superior to you, it's almost an allergic reaction. I mean, people can't do it. They'll sweat, they'll tremble. And so you have to think about how do I orchestrate this? How do I do this? One is in the order to speak. I always tell the CEO, you speak last. I mean, you can welcome people to the meeting. You can motivate them, say, oh, we're happy to have you here. And then I say, sit down, shut up, and listen. Your job is to listen, not to talk. And sometimes you have to be very rigid about, okay, I'm going to start with the lowest guy and then move up. So no one ever has to contradict anybody senior to them. But by the time the senior person gets out, the senior person's actually heard a number of different perspectives that he never would have heard otherwise. Sometimes that starts to break through some of these cultural norms when they flip it around and say, disagreeing is not about respect. It's about getting information. And so there are ways to start to turn this around, but you have to realize, if you are in those cultures, that as a facilitator, you've got your hands full, because you're not going to fix things that are deeply embedded in a national culture. And a lot of corporate culture things, you're simply not going to go in and say, where's that culture switch? I'm going to turn it over here. You need to work hard and have some inside help. Yeah, one of the things that I found that can help, it can help in some of these situations, and that's taking some external perspectives. And so, like in the oil and gas business, I'd like to say, okay, what if Microsoft had this opportunity dropped in their lap? What if Disney had this opportunity dropped in their lap? And that allows people to suspend some of the culture, some of the, well, we would never do that. Oh, Disney, oh, they do this, they do that. That's okay. So why wouldn't that work for you? Well, we're different. But it would break this out, because now you're attributing things to somebody else. And she said, well, they might sell this. They might do that. They might, and go, oh, really? Well, we might be, that gives me an idea. We might be able to do something. But once you're locked into, this is how Chevron does things, and you could fill in the name of anybody. This is how Microsoft does. This is how Exxon. But every company's have. If they're successful, they must have some formula that's worked for them, because they're doing quite well. But how do you break through that? And it allows them to speculate about other ways to look at the opportunity that's very foreign to them, because you're now taking their brain and sitting it over in the brain of some other entity. So forcing an external perspective can be hard, because in a lot of framing workshops, I see they spend too much time on internal framing, on internal stuff, because it's controllable. What will those other people do? What will the partners do? What will the governments do? Well, we don't know. We'll treat them as uncertainty. They might approve this, they might not. But you sit and say, they're not out there just flipping coins. They have objectives and values too. What might they do? What's in their best interest? And that brought in, game theory. I spent time dabbling in game theory. You mentioned that at the start. And we've actually introduced, I call gaming framing, because it rhymes and it sounds catchy, but it basically has a series of steps in a framing workshop that forces you to sit down and go through who are the other players in this opportunity. So there's you guys, because we're in the meeting, but do you have partners? The government? Are there competitors? Are there customers, suppliers, on and on? Okay, and you got all of these people. Now, what do you think their values are? What are they trying to maximize? What are their desires? Now, think about, what would they do? How would they frame it? And again, this is the Disney, Microsoft, online. These are the people that touch your opportunity. And in many cases, all these people actually have to get on the same side to actually have this opportunity move ahead, right? The government's got to give you permits, perhaps. Your partners have to go along with it. The suppliers have to agree with it, and the customers have to buy this thing. So you kind of go through and look at it, force it from each perspective, and not fall into the trap. A lot of people say, well, if I was the government, this is what I do. I say, well, as soon as you're elected president, you come and we'll talk to you, but you're not the government. And so what would the government do? What is the government's best interest? Does the government really want this opportunity, this project to go ahead? Is this a project that the government really doesn't think is very important to them? That matters to you. And to force people to go through and basically frame the opportunity. And again, this is something we do in about 2 days. It's great fun. And people enjoy it. But you have to get the diversity in the room. You have to get the intellectual diversity, not that physical diversity or any of that nonsense, but the intellectual diversity. I need somebody in the room who understands the government, who understands. So I want somebody in customer relations in the room if the customer is an important player, because they're going to say, okay, this is what the customer really wants. I've got data, I've got information. This is what they want. This is what they don't want. And have everybody look. And I did one of these gaming framing exercises a number of years ago, and it had to do with there was basically some fuel terminals, and the fuel terminals were there, three competing, Shell, Chevron, and so three competing terminals. And basically, the local government wanted them to consolidate into one terminal to free up some space that they could do with other urban projects that they had. And it made sense to do this. I mean, it was kind of painful to do it, but yeah, we could all work together and have one terminal. I mean, it's just bringing gasoline and diesel into the country. So, but they didn't want to do it, because at the end of the day, there'd be no more profit for them. They'd simply have to spend a lot of money shutting down these two terminals that they didn't do. So they were just dragging their feet, didn't want to do anything. Well, the city stopped issuing permits, but basically it gave them like 30-day operating permits. And it was very painful to get this. And they kept saying, what is going on? Why is the city doing this? Why is the mayor doing this? The people are going to hate him. They're going to be gasoline lines. It's going to be terrible. And so we had great people, and some person stood up in the meeting, and she says, I've been living here for my whole life. And she said, I personally know the mayor, and the mayor is doing this because he wants to get into national politics, and he wants to be able to show how he's standing up to big oil. And everybody says, oh, well, now this makes complete sense. If there's long gasoline lines, who gets blamed? The mayor or big oil? Well, rule one, always blame big oil, right? It's always their fault. And once we reflected that it was a politically driven decision for the mayor, they were able to come through and find solutions. All of a sudden, solutions came into the frame, came into the solution, the set of possible solutions, because somebody said, wait a minute, this guy isn't driven by what we would be driven by if we were the mayor. But it was, if you didn't have the right person in the room that could say that, they never would have figured that out on their own, because nobody knew the mayor. And so it's that kind of reflection that helps you broaden out and get a better frame, getting other points of view.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think you explained really well when I ask you about outcomes. So it's that shared understanding from different perspectives, from different stakeholders, that you really need to have those stakeholders with vested interest in this opportunity, who actually have some sort of level of influence on your opportunity. Otherwise, you might be brainstorming, with the wrong people on the wrong problem, and that's why there is no fit or no or low project success rate. Frank, what I want to ask you now is really reflect on your experiences and share with us today what was the biggest challenge for you as a framing facilitator. So for example, 12 years ago when I started facilitation, like I remember my first workshop with executives in the room. Like one of my biggest challenge was, how I'm going to ask them to pick up post-it notes and write down what are your issues, questions, risks, and opportunities, right? And I'm like, and no one before have ever done this. Somehow, I think you mentioned that earlier. There is a different way of being amongst executives in a lot of those corporations, and there is a different way of being with those tactical teams. So that was kind of my biggest challenge when I realized that if I want others to feel like comfortable and equal, I need to start looking at the people in the room as equal and lead some of those behaviors so others can mirror this, and then just sort of open those opportunities first. So that I remember that was my first challenge, asking executives, pick up the post-it notes, and I want you to write down quietly what are your issues and questions. And then obviously it was a lot easier later on to work with different executives. So what was your biggest challenge, Frank?
Oh gosh. So many challenges. I think the biggest challenges, and we've talked a little bit about before, was getting the decision makers to really participate, as you said, to pick up the stickies, to realize that they were the workers in the process. So what are we doing here? We're making some decisions. And I was saying, so you're the decision maker, right? I said, that sounds like you have to do the work. Other people can help you and support you, but helping them understand that they had to get their hands dirty, that they had to get involved, because this was actually their product, and getting the mind shift to say, I'm just here to approve the decision. I'm just here like Caesar, give the thumbs up or the thumbs down nonsense. And I go, no, you're trying to build the best decision that we can. And you are in the unique position as the head of this organization that you know stuff. You have understandings about this that a lot of the people don't have. And if you don't bring that stuff in to build this story about the opportunity, we don't get it right. And if we don't get it right, your decision is not going to be as good as it could be. But you have to participate, and getting that's been my big challenge, and I've succeeded. And as I've said, it sometimes you failed, and you sometimes sit and I go, well, if that's the case, I can't help you as much as I can. I mean, I can go through the framing, I can go through all that without them, and we can do the best we can. But you sit and you say, it's like I got an orchestra and I'm going to conduct the orchestra, but the people playing the violins didn't show up today. Well, okay, we could still make some music here, but it ain't going to be very good because I don't have this really important component of the orchestra, the violins, to play their part. It's the same thing as the CEO or the vice president or whoever he is in the organization. Say, you got one of the instruments, you got a role in this that you have to play. and you have to get comfortable. That was some of the cultural and behavioral changes. So it got easier over time when people understood that they actually did get better decisions, that it was really worthwhile. And then once it starts, then the executives, the vice presidents meet and they start talking about this. And the ones that are really respected say, hey, I've done this. This really works. And you say, oh, gee, if Ray did it, maybe I should do this. And so if you can get a few decision makers, and in reality, I mean, that's what happened at Chevron. We had a couple, I'll say sweet spots. We had a couple places where we had executives that just naturally liked this stuff. They just, I mean, you took them into a framing workshop and their eyes lit up and said, wow, we're talking about the right stuff. So they got it. And so I found somebody that got it. And okay, now talk to other people. Tell them how good. And the word of mouth. If I go in and tell somebody, oh, it's a great idea, then yeah, Frank, sure. But if another senior vice president peer comes in and says, hey, this really helped us a lot. Oh, well, maybe I should do it too. And so finding those individuals in the organization that get it and leverage them and then let it spread over time. Do the best you can in the framing. And, there have been framing workshops. This didn't add a whole lot of value. We got through it. I got paid, but they really didn't have the heart in it. It didn't work really well. Unfortunately, some people say, oh, see, framing doesn't work. And I say, oh, yeah, you're right. Poor framing doesn't work. And particularly the when you get in, and some facilitators facilitate this, is going through the process is the goal. And I sit and say, no, going through the process is not a goal. Using every tool is not the goal. It's getting clarity and insights. And when you have those clarity and insights, light bulb goes on. You go, oh, now I understand this thing I'm calling a project, this thing I'm calling an opportunity. I say, okay, now you've got it. And then helping that spread is hard. I mean, that was I was very fortunate to be at Chevron because they were full of managers and executives that were open to doing this. And that was just in that culture. They were open to learning. And so I was fortunate in that I started doing this with a very receptive audience. And if you start doing it with an audience that's hostile to it, I'm not sure I have a lot of advice other than you should pick better customers. You could try to demonstrate, but even then, you have to find a sweet spot. Maybe in the organization, you find a smaller group somewhere that does get it, and you start sort of like an infection. You infect this part of the company, and then it starts to spread. It's, oh, hey, this is good. Now I'm going to do this. Oh, look, they did that. That's good. And sometimes it spreads very slowly, and so you say you do what you can, and you figure out what works. But there are times when I've just had to walk away and to say, I can't help people that don't want to change. If you're happy with what you've got, okay, don't listen to me. I'll go someplace else.
And I really love that how you share yourself and being honest with, when you can really help, and it needs something else. The company needs something else first. I've been speaking to different framing facilitators, some in the UK, some in Canada and Australia. I've spent most of my time facilitating in Australia before I came over to the US. And I see that there are different schools of framing, and I think they've sort of been developing over the last couple of years. For example, I even worked with one company that wasn't really ready for facilitating workshops because they've never had a workshop before. Some of those, I think maybe you described early on. So they actually stopped the process in between because they never had situation where people would go to breakout rooms and chit chat by themselves. That was really interesting experience. Oh, and so they ran with my guidelines. So they asked, listen, I want you to define the process for me with all the definitions. And I see there are companies that really going that way when I think you mentioned that when they're seeking that clarity around what is the process, and they use Excel spreadsheet or PowerPoint, and they literally go tool by tool. And and they say, well, that's because it's a structured process of shaping what the opportunity is about. And they sort of walking away from that old school, which I think you and I were taught, where you have someone who has no vested interest in the outcome of those conversations, someone who doesn't really supply information during the workshop, but someone who can coach to help the group work smarter, deeper, and faster. What are your thoughts on that? And I can see, so you've got like following the process or having a facilitator. And on top of that, you've got that third approach, which is online 2 hours engagement. So sort of like gets hard, let's stop and reconvene next week. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like another way I can see companies are using it. So it gets hard, let's stop and call for another meeting. What are your thoughts on that in terms of getting the best out of opportunity framing workshops?
Yeah. So I think a couple. One thing I think facilitators, if a facilitator is flexible and can deal with things and kind of manage as you go ahead, and then you can navigate this better. Some facilitators are very rigid, and if they get off their agenda, they absolutely fall apart, and that's difficult. So I think having the ability to be flexible helps to steer it, to see what happens. I mean, you think about going, and I live in a world of analogies for some reason. Maybe that's because I started off as a geologist, but you think about, like, if you take a rafting trip, you're going down the rapids, Grand Canyon or whatever, and everybody's paddling that raft. And if people stop paddling, you're going to flip. You're going to be in trouble. So it's everybody's job to get through the rapids, have fun, but not die on the rocks. But you got the one guy back there with the tiller who's saying, okay, you guys paddle left, you go over here, don't go there, do this. Okay. So the facilitator is sort of reading the rapids, looking ahead and saying, okay, let's go over here. Now you guys got to pull. I mean, I got the tiller, but you guys got to, and so if I say on the left, paddle hard, paddle hard, paddle hard, you better paddle hard or you're going to drown. But I'm telling you, and so maybe that's a mindset that the facilitator think about. Is I'm this guy. I'm in it, right? If they flip their raft, guess who goes in the drink with them? I'm wet, but I'm there because I can help see where they're going. Say, no, you don't want to go there. Okay, this tool isn't working. And I've had times when I've sat there and stopped the group. We're wasting our time. Well, we're trying to complete this. I said, it's not helping you. And so just finishing going through the motions because it's on your list. Stupid. Tear up the list. Tear up the agenda. I hated agenda. I used to have agendas. We're going to start then. We're going to have lunch then. We're going to leave then. And we're going to break when you have to. Other than that, we're always on track. We're always on time. People used to get so frustrated. How are we doing? We're right on time. But where are we supposed to be in the meeting? Right here. Now, I have an agenda in my head. I have goals. I know what I'm trying to get through. And am I doing that? But if I tell them, if I put an agenda on the wall, the obsessive people get so obsessed with, whoa, it's 10:15 and we're supposed to be on step 3. I said, but if you don't finish step 2, then step 3 is a total waste. And if we got to spend more time in step 2, guess what? We're going to spend more time in step 2. And so I only have, the only agendas I have are really sketchy. Start now, take a lunch. In terms of breaks, I tell people, the rule of, the 2 feet. You got 2 feet, use them. If you got to take a break, say, I need to take a break. I tell them right at the start of the meeting that facilitators are biologically altered. I do not have to eat. I do not have to pee. I do not have to do anything through an entire meeting. I can stand up 8 hours, say go, and I'll go for 8 hours straight. So I said, do not depend on me to call a break because I don't need them. I won't take them. Will you want a break? Fine. You do it. Good. Really? It's okay, guys. You need to take more breaks? It's okay. We're going to get there. Don't worry. I'm going to get you there. But it's trusting the facilitator and sort of steering through that. And once you do that, it's fun. But boy, I've co-facilitated with some of these process Nazis, and they just quiver through the entire meeting because they're worried, oh, you're behind schedule. You are. I said, I'm fine. And we'll end. If I tell people we'll end at 4, we will end exactly at 4 because I promised that we'd be done at 4. And we will do that. And every workshop I've ever done, I'd sit down at the end. I'd say, we'll leave at 4. And I'd count down. I'd say, okay, I'd be talking and doing this. And I'd say, okay, we're going to adjourn in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We're done. I said, how did we finish like that? And I said, that's my job. It's okay. Don't worry about it. We're done. We got what we needed done. If there's something that we didn't finish or didn't get to well, we'll figure out what to do. But if you did all this stuff really well, just go on with it. And using whatever tools and oh gosh, tools and all this stuff. When I do my sort of formal classes, PowerPoint and all this sort of stuff on the whole decision analysis process, I would always have a slide. People always say, what are the decision analysis tools? And I'd have little pictures with little cartoons of decision hierarchies and decision trees and tornado diagrams and charts and SWOTs and all this stuff. And then I'd have an animation come in with a human brain. And I'd say there's only one decision analysis tool, and that is your brain. All the things that you think of as tools are attachments. They're like the things you put on your vacuum cleaner, different attachments. You take this attachment. Oh, this is a tornado diagram. Attach it to the brain. Is that helping you understand something? No, unattach it. Put this on. Does that help you? SWOT analysis. Put it on. Is that helping you? Okay, no, take it off. I said, these are attachments. They're all very good, useful attachments, and they all have a purpose. This attachment is to clean the drapes. Don't try to vacuum the rug with the thing to clean the drapes, okay? Look at the tools. Pick the right attachment. Is it helping you? And do this. And you do not have to use all the attachments that come with the blasted vacuum cleaner every time you vacuum. And so people would then start to get this. And I'd say, the only thing is you got to think. You got to use the brain. And I want you to think, and all these things are doing is to forcing you to look at this from different perspectives, to learn something about this opportunity that you didn't understand before. The opportunity should look very different at the end of the workshop than at the start. If all you've done is reaffirm that you were right at the start, I get very suspicious that we're just in an exercise of self-deception.
Yeah, that's really the key point, which I think you mentioned earlier, where we're really talking about when is the right time to do opportunity framing workshops, and I just want to really look at the industry. So, for example, if you look at Project Management Institute, for example, I'm the president of Project Management Institute of Coastal Bend, which is in South Texas. So that really allowed me to immerse myself in those conversations with other project managers who are not from the oil and gas industry. They mainly from healthcare or IT. And, as you know, the PMI, they have different project life cycle. The first phase is called Project Initiate, which is somehow our develop phase, pre-execution phase. And those conversations are so unfamiliar for them. They really, when I speak to them, they come when the scope is given, the cost is given, schedule is given, and they're running their kickoff meetings, looking at engaging contractors. And I'm like, well, hold on. If there is anything that anyone could learn from oil and gas industry, I really think is the opportunity framing workshop and the first crucial, 2 phases. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you explain framing and the benefits of framing to those project managers that come outside of the oil and gas industry? How do you tell them when is the right time to do framing workshops if their life cycle is different?
Yes, you guys spent most of his time in oil and gas, but a little time with some others. And so I'll try to help a bit with this. I think, first of all, there's understanding up front the different kinds of decisions that they make. And maybe like the first step, if I get involved with a project, is let's call it decision diagnosis. I look and I say, okay, so let's understand, what is this thing that we're talking about? And it's we need to build something, we need to do something, I just got to do something, right? And I got to spend some money. And as to start to poke around and say, okay, so what's really going on? For example, is this a routine, repetitive decision? Is this something that you do periodically? Is it something that you've never done before? Is this something completely new? Is this something that's very big, and these are very irrevocable decisions, so once I make them, I really can't take them back? Or is this a decision that has a lot of options to steer it? So I could try this. Oh, that's not working. I move a little to the left, a little to the right, back up, do something, and kind of diagnose. Because you sit and say, project framing is most critical for these big, irrevocable decisions that if you get it wrong, by the time you figured out that you missed this big chunk of value, you've probably missed it forever and you're not going to get it. So you better spend more time now to be sure you got it.
Mm-hmm.
For repetitive decisions at the other end, the operational decision, something that you do every day, the right cycle may be try it once, see what happened, reflect on it, try it again, see what happens. Just learning cycle, kind of at the old QI cycle, kind of at the other end of the spectrum, things that you do every day. Don't sit and study them to death. Try something, because you can try it differently. There's very little consequence if I do it this way, because I can try it again. And so so now I've kind of given you the whole spectrum. Say, where does this fit in? Is this a decision that I can stage? It's an opportunity that instead of doing once, I can break it into phases. So maybe my framing workshop at first is saying, well, what is this really? Is this one big decision? Is this an opportunity that I can stage and learn? So I do phase one, and then I do phase two, or stage two, stage three. Can I learn? Okay, that's different, because now I have to get into my framing the issues around what do I have to capture to learn to keep doing it better. This is something that I've never done before. It's a completely new opportunity. How do I even learn what this is when I don't know basic definition of what things are? So to me, a lot of this is the decision diagnosis and the recognition that sometimes if you get to try and try and try and try again every day, then I said, don't spend any time framing. Just do some little experiments. And that is sort of the framing. After a while, you'll figure out what works, what doesn't work, and you can continuously improve and get that to work. Because we saw that at Chevron, particularly like refineries, which are sort of very different. People think of oil and gas, they think of drilling wells and that, but refineries are chemical plants. There's a lot of repetitive things that you need to do, maybe around maintenance projects or whatever. And at first, decision analysis came, and people could be like, oh, now you're sticking this 3-week process in front of something that's going to take me 2 hours to do. I say, okay, nowhere did we say it should take that much. Maybe the framing quote workshop for this routine maintenance job is to get the 2 or 3 people together, and before you jump in, to say, okay, is there anything different about this project? Is there something that we learned from the last time we did this that we want to make sure that we either do again because it was really good, or that we never do it again because it really made a mess? What else could we do? And maybe it's a half-hour conversation over coffee before you start to work. But you say, okay, I really understand this opportunity or problem. I got it. And if it's simple, don't overcomplicate it, because I've seen people that overcomplicate things because that's what they do, and make everything big. And so a lot of people really got turned off early on in decision analysis at Chevron because it was like one size fits all. And we sat and said, okay, if I'm putting out an $11 billion national natural gas facility versus I'm drilling $100,000 well in the San Joaquin Valley, those are different issues completely. And so the process, even though fundamentally you say, oh, you're kind of going through the same thing, as you're going through faster, you're asking different things, and you've already drilled 500 of those $100,000 wells. And so you really know what you're doing here, don't you? And so your whole framing loop is, okay, do we have to do anything differently here? Has something happened? And so you're getting the essence of framing but you're only going through that reflection to get what you need. And the really good facilitators, I think, have that ability at the diagnosis up front to talk. And so what I often do before I come in to do a facilitation gig with somebody is I get a list of everybody that's going to be in the meeting. And I book a 1 hour or half hour, whatever it makes sense, given the complexity, phone call with them to simply say, okay, we got this meeting scheduled in a week and a half for Project X. What are the issues? What do you see going on here? Just tell me what you think. So there's 8 people in the meeting. I hear 8 stories about Project X. At that point, I understand, okay, everybody's clear, everybody's aligned. This sounds like it's pretty straightforward, or holy smokes, I got X1, X2, X3, X4, X5, X6, X8. We got to do something really different because I got to get all these people on the same page because they have completely different perspectives. And so I'll have those conversations before. They're easy to do. It's like I say, half hour, 60-minute phone call with people just to get their take on it. It also then speeds up the start of the meeting because all of these issues are going to come out anyway. And if I do it in phone calls before, I can start the meeting saying, okay, this is what I heard. This is what I heard from everybody. Very often, that is the first time that everybody in the room has actually heard everybody's thoughts. Because when I'm talking to them one-on-one, then there's nobody else to dominate the conversation. Whether I'm talking to the lowliest team member or the boss. And so I put out and say, okay, this is now what it looks like to me, these phone calls. And then we start to go from there. And that can really help diagnose and figure out what are the real problems here? What part of my whole framing toolkit do I really want to bring to bear here? What parts don't I need? What parts they pretty much already figured out, and I don't need to drag them through the knothole again. I mean, God, there are facilitators that you should drag everybody through everything. They already understand this. They already understand their business environment really well. Why would I make them go through and do a SWOT or these other things that just help them understand that environment? I'd say, they got it. They don't need that thing. This is what they need. And it's that willingness, I think, to diagnose, to figure that out. And part of that comes with the experience. You get a new facilitator, they say, how do you do that? And you say, well, there's going to be some trial and error unless you can apprentice with somebody. But over time, when you've been doing this for 15 or 20 years, you start to figure out very quickly what's going on. And then you can come in and say, okay, what tool do I need? What does this group need? So at the end of the workshop, at the end of the day or the hour or the week, whatever it is, that I made things better, that they walk out and say, wow, this is so much better than it was. Thank you. That's great. We've got it now. And there's no formula for doing that. Yeah. If anybody out listening thinks there's a formula and I just got it secret, it's patented and it's in my wallet. Sorry, it doesn't exist. Every customer, every company, every industry is different. And you simply, and all the good facilitators that I know have that ability to a large degree, is to diagnose and say, what's really going on here? And what do we really need to go through to bring the clarity around this opportunity that this group needs, whatever that clarity is, and get them to that. And
yes, I really hear that you don't have defined process for everything. And, whether someone is unfamiliar with stages and gates, or is just before taking on a new job to build a new hospital, for example, we can still use some of those tools to really help them to understand the complexities. And so they really understand, where are they at, by using maybe a couple of framing tools as opposed to the whole suite of framing tools, which is probably about 20 or more. And that's the kind of beauty in being trained as a framing facilitator, that you just get equipped with so many different tools, and you learn with the experience how to really implement them. What is the good time to talk about vision or value drivers, or before we jump into decision hierarchy, I love conversation about what are some of the givens and assumptions. And people say, oh, well, what's the difference? What's the difference between given assumption? Right. So it's really good because it's like you get that education, but you also get to see where people are at. And then when you train them that, you know what, if you're unsure, make it an assumption, they almost like feel relieved. It's like, oh, I haven't thought about it. Oh, that's great. Like, oh, I've got the space.
Yeah.
So, and so the more ease we create in those meetings, I think the better it gets with making people feel heard and included. And then that's also one of my way to manage that hierarchy that often exists, whether you want it or not. Well, I've got the two questions for you, Frank. Really, well, let's talk about AI. So obviously, every company in every industry is getting really excited about those new artificial intelligence tools, whether it's a new software, into decision making or decision analysis, or is a new super cool reporting system. We're now in that stage where some companies are faster than others in absorbing and implementing some of those AI technologies. And, from our experience as opportunity framing workshop is something which is applied to any type of a project, whether the project is a capital project or initiative or just a change management. What do you think? What are some of the key considerations or strategies that you think could help navigate those complexities around this whole unknown environment? What are your thoughts on that? What are some of the questions that companies should be asking? What are some of those decisions that they really should be making before they jump into the execution phase?
Well, I got to say, first of all, when I read that you sent me the list of questions, when I read that, I misread. I thought you said A1, and I thought we are going to talk about steak sauce. But and then I'm just a commercial, and I can't remember the date, but it's coming up. The Society of Decision Professionals, along with SDG, Strategic Decisions Group, is putting on a webinar talking about a lot of this subject as to how does AI even fit into this yet. So Google it, it's out on the web, but spread it to your community that there are people are working on this, because that's a question that's on the minds of everybody, and then they're trying to fit it in. The thing that puzzles me still is where you're looking at strategic decisions into an unknown future, where you've got problems that are exceptionally complex and have a high degree of uncertainty. I don't know how AI gives you any more traction than any other way of speculating. And I worry that people start to use it to replace real thinking. I think artificial intelligence, and I very cynically always say, I just wish I had some real intelligence on the team to think about this. And I don't know much at all about it, but I would hate to see it used as a crutch, and it could actually serve as blind spots, because they let this machine do the thinking. And maybe someday we get to that world. Although I was thinking when I was talking about this that probably if I lived at the turn of the century, and I'm still talking about the 19th to the 20th, not the recent one that I lived through, I would probably be complaining about those newfangled automobiles and that they'll never replace the horse. So AI might be in that kind of a realm. I think if it challenges our thinking, I think that's good, and I think there's a potential for it. I worry that it might obscure and not bring more clarity, that it might just be another sort of black boxy thing that worries me, because it's not giving me that ultimate goal of decision quality and decision analysis, which is, and this I got from Ron Howard, the professor at Stanford is clarity of action, that I now understand what I'm about to do to myself. And if AI can bring more clarity, kind of open up the box and let me see what's in it, great. If it becomes a crutch that just, oh, we crank this through and here's the right answer, here's the decision, then I worry it could lead us in the wrong way. And particularly about those kind of big strategic questions. Should I invest in something completely new and different that's out of my experience? This is a new total opportunity. I mean, energy companies are facing those kind of investment decisions right now, major strategic decisions about how do I transition from the fossil fuel business into a broader definition of the energy business. And companies are going through that in various ways and coming out in very, very different directions. And so I wondered, can AI help in that kind of a decision? If I'm building a new hospital, something that people have built many times around the world, there may be some way, because there's a lot of data. I mean, people talk about big data. And I sit and say, okay, how much data is there about the future? I'm pretty sure that number is pretty close to zero. There's, we can extrapolate a little bit. We can conclude things from the past, but big data where I'm doing a lot of stuff repetitively may be wonderful, but I still wonder about how you roll that. There are a lot of assumptions. If I roll big data, which by definition is historical, into the future, what assumptions am I wrapping up into that before I move ahead, and how good are those assumptions? Or am I bringing history forward and I'm never going to see the answer to what's really there? It's like, it's interesting. You look at cultures, and some cultures invented the wheel and other cultures at the same time never quite figured that out. And so you wonder about, okay, so what did somebody see? How did somebody all of a sudden see when you're sliding this rock? There's some guy sitting there going, well, if you put a wheel, a log under that, it'd roll a lot better. It'd roll easier. Who gets that? And how do those insights come? And can AI help us or not to see that stuff, which is pretty much unknowable and speculative right now? And I would love to see it. And I say there's a lot of work going on now at Informs and a lot of big organizations that are dedicated to analytics. There are a lot of people figuring it out. There are also a lot of consultants trying to be sure that their field gets solidly niched into whatever this new analytics thing is. So if I'm a big data guy, then I want to shove big data into everything. If I'm a decision analyst, I want to shove that into everything. And this is called job preservation. Not that I'm cynical about this stuff, but I think AI is an exciting adventure. And I think, just like with any exciting adventures, that we need to be cautious, particularly around big, strategic, irrevocable decisions, to really think about that, because mistakes and bad decisions are very costly and can have very bad long-term consequences.
Yeah, and I can really relate to that, what you said. And sadly, you see more in mainstream media benefits, as opposed to conversations where we when we do a risk assessment to understand what's in the way, and not to dismiss the benefits, but just to have more balanced view and make more informed decisions. And I think some of those examples, especially the one where when the tanker, where the terminal decision was, you've identified that was a political decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yep.
And from my experience, I've seen the same, that a lot more of my clients, they don't really have technical challenges that drive the framing workshop. It's usually the political or environmental or organizational, and so, like, I could see the AI being really on that path to help to find the solution faster. But then the challenge is we might really drive, that attitude where we really rush to make decisions and we rush to go to execution phase before we really understand what is driving this project, right? And that's something which can only happen when individuals come together and they explore between themselves what they see possible, and how they begin to see how this project fits into what they're trying to achieve as a function or even as an organization. So that's really leading me to the last question, which is, we talked briefly about that AI, and I understand there's a lot of unknown, and I do encourage everyone to check out Society of Decision Professionals, the upcoming webinar about the future, or the interface between AI and decision making. But my question really right now is, so what is the future of opportunity framing workshop? How could you envision the future application of opportunity framing workshop? What do you think, Frank?
I think, and I think in this, I guess my question is in the future somewhere where you can internalize these skills enough that it becomes so much more the way people think that you really don't need a facilitated workshop, that they can sort of self-facilitate their thinking, that they can talk about the right things, that it just becomes natural, the way that you do things. So you don't need external help, because you already know how to get the external perspective that you need to get rid of the blinders that everybody has. And so maybe it gets internalized. And again, back to maybe there's some ways that AI can again help bring that around so that people get more prompted to what questions should I be asking. And the tendency that people like to ask easy questions, or questions that they're familiar with, or questions that they can answer, because we've been trained not to say I don't know, and shy away from the really difficult questions. And so that may be a way that you start to internalize some of this, rather than having people flying around the world, rather than having face-to-face meetings. Are there ways that you can gather some information and get the same results, which is a clear understanding of the opportunity, but in a simpler, more routine way? And I think that comes with skill. I certainly think at Chevron, and I've been gone there for 11 years, so I can't really say what all goes on there, but I think a lot, I'm not sure the number of framing workshops that are formally held versus teams get together. They simply naturally self-facilitate. Okay, you ask the right questions. We probe the right way of each other. Gee, what's going on here? What might be missing? Who else should we talk to? That it becomes simply second nature to become self-framing. And so it's now not viewed as something different, something that we go to, something that we bring someone in for. It simply becomes, oh, this is just how you make decisions. This is how you do this. And it seems a natural workflow. And I think that's ultimately the goal, is to make it sort of fingerprintless, as I say, so that it's just how you think. But what else would we do? I wouldn't do it any other way. And there are a lot of work processes that have become so ingrained in the system that people now don't even know, why do you do that? I go, I don't know, just the way we always have done it. And I think a lot of that, certainly in framing, a lot of that can happen at some point with teams, with the recognition that sometimes there's something that you say, well, I really need to get some other perspective. I really need to help. Complex, contentious. There are always going to be some problems that are so contentious that you say, I need to bring in, if not a facilitator, a referee, somebody to come in and help us through this difficult stuff. And so I think that's part of fluency with the whole process, is recognizing when you need help and when you can do it yourself and it'll all be fine. And that the help is only applied where you really need to have that external influence that you really need to get people away in a room for a couple of days to say, okay, this is a really complicated, uncertain mess. We really need to get our arms around this because we're just really not sure what's going on. And I don't know if those things ever go away, although certainly technology will change how they happen. I mean, at some point there'll be holographic projections and you'll just appear in a room anywhere in the world. And I will definitely be retired by that point, because the whole reason that I did consulting is I love to fly around the world and travel. And, you know, when the world went virtual over COVID, I basically, I'm not going to do this. I'm sorry. I says, because they've eliminated the travel. They've eliminated the one reward on this whole thing. It's like to go places. So,
Yeah.
you know, so and to me, there's so much with the live interaction, the body and reading people, that I sit and I say, you know, I just can't do the virtual world. But fortunately, I was in a situation where I could just sit back and still do whatever I wanted to. I mean, COVID very minimally changed my life. I'm retired, so what do you do? I do the same thing I always do. I just sit around and do whatever. You know, I just couldn't get on an airplane and fly around for a year or so, and that bugged me.
Yeah, no, I see there's a lot more requests for in-person facilitation, so I'm sure you can get some opportunities to fly around and help. So what I hear Frank you saying is that really the future is to build internal capabilities, you know. And if I like recall my time in Woodside, the old Woodside Energy in Australia, it was exactly, you know, what you've experienced with Chevron, where people were so familiar with those conversations and they knew distinction. So when we would have a low risk, low cost brownfield initiative, small change, they would be very comfortable leading those sessions themselves and catching each other and asking questions. And they would not necessarily call a facilitator to come in and help.
Right.
And I know a lot of them moved away, moved to consulting, and they bringing that mindset to inspire others, invite other people, especially those who have vested interest and impact into opportunity, and ask them what they think is an issue, ask them what they think is an opportunity. So this is definitely the way to go. The other thing is that you mentioned, and I just want to highlight that one, which is, you know, when as a facilitator, you know that when the most magnificent moment is when you see the aha moment, you know, when you see, and I think you beautifully described that, when the team leaves with a different view of what the opportunity is about. And, you know, and so often it happens when, you know, we start the meeting, and that's just down to the group dynamics, you know, and so many people, so many managers, you know, they blame their team, saying the team is dysfunctional just because it got really hard and challenging in the discussion. So they don't necessarily have that shared understanding that that diversity is just a natural occurrence that happens because people with different knowledge and expertise got together, and they see that elephant, like you said, you know, from a different perspectives.
Yeah.
And that skilled facilitator really can help to move the team through that struggle.
Yep.
So they can experience, and obviously once the teams experience the struggle, you know, then all these amazing miracles happen. Like, you know, they begin to relate to each other with more respect, more understanding, they bond. You know, they begin to like each other and understand that, oh yeah, I understand from the compliance point of view or from the environmental point of view. I see what's important to you and I know why.
Yeah.
And then those miracles happen, like, you know, you and I know. Well, that's just so amazing. So well, with that in mind, I just want to thank you, Frank. Thank you for sharing your valuable insights and your expertise on opportunity framing workshops. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you today. And before we wrap up, I want to ask you if there is any final advice or message you would like to leave our audience with, especially people who are still on the fence to have their first framing workshops. What would you say to about opportunity framing workshops?
I think again, it's what I tell them is that go in with an open mind and see how it can help you, to be willing to try something different. They're just going into something for the first time. Be curious, say, what could this possibly help me? And not go in with the mindset of, all right, I have to go through this, prove that it's worthwhile. Because if you come with that attitude, you won't see the value. You'll miss it, and you'll dismiss it. So try to have that open mind and that curiosity. And I'm like a broken record, but if I could switch everybody from the advocacy mindset to the curiosity mindset and just wondering about these things, then framing workshops, as it just become a natural outcome, because you just want to explore, you want to understand what you're doing. And a very subtle but very profound mind shift. And in some companies, advocacy is so much part of the culture that's a tough one. And so the curious may just quit the company and go somewhere else. So some of this becomes self-fulfilling.
Yeah. 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 Well, thank you so much, Frank. That was such a pleasure having you today. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, and don't leave. I'm just going to end the recording. So thank you so much.
Thank you.